"Are you deaf, cashier, or just too poor to understand numbers?" the customer snapped, loud enough for half the store to laugh. And the worst part was that he wasn't even the person I was most afraid of when the black SUV stopped outside our frosted windows. It was nearly midnight in late December, and our discount grocery store on the edge of the city looked as tired as I felt, all flickering fluorescent lights, melting snow tracked across the cracked floor, and stale heat coughing out of old vents that never worked right. I was standing behind Register 3 in my bold sunflower yellow cashier vest over a sky blue thermal shirt, my fingers red from cold and from counting coins too many times, because people like him loved making poor girls recount their mistakes in public. My name tag said Alina, and though the men who came in after dark rarely used it, they called me cashier, girl, sweetheart, idiot, or pretty when they wanted something ugly. That night, the man insulting me was drunk, rich enough to smell like expensive cologne and cruelty, and waving a receipt in my face over 12 rubles he claimed I'd stolen, while my manager, Pavel, stood nearby pretending to organize cigarettes so he could enjoy the show. I remember thinking I could survive the humiliation because humiliation was cheap and I had endured plenty of it. But then the door opened, a gust of white snow swirled in, and every sound in the store changed, as if fear itself had walked in, wearing black leather gloves. And before I tell you what happened next, tell me this in the comments. If you were standing under those cold grocery lights and the whole room suddenly went silent, would your stomach drop too? Wherever you're watching from, and whatever time it is there, stay with me for this one, because that was the night my life split in two, and the man everyone feared looked at me like I was the only honest thing left in the room. The first thing I noticed about him was not the tattoo on his neck, though later that dark mark would haunt dreams and save me from them too. It was the stillness. Men with power usually entered loudly, swinging it around like a weapon, but he moved through the doorway with the kind of controlled quiet that made every other man in the store straighten without meaning to. Snow dusted the shoulders of his black coat. Underneath it, and his suit was cut so perfectly it looked dangerous. His face was sharp in a way that made softness seem like a rumor someone had once told about him, and when his pale eyes swept the room, laughter died so fast it felt swallowed. Even before Pavel whispered, "Volkov," under his breath, I knew exactly who he was. Lev Volkov, 28. The name mothers lowered their voices over, policemen pretended not to know, and desperate men prayed would never be attached to their debts. I had never seen him in person before. People in my neighborhood spoke about him the way children spoke about winter wolves, real, beautiful, merciless, and always closer than you thought. They said he controlled half the city's ports, all the right men in the wrong places, and the fate of anyone foolish enough to cross him. They said he buried traitors in forests where the snow never fully melted over them. They said he had inherited an empire while still young and made it colder, smarter, cleaner. They said many things. None of them explained why a man like that would walk into a discount grocery store smelling of oranges, bleach, and bad luck at midnight, while a drunk businessman was shouting at a cashier over coins. The man at my register went pale so quickly his flushed cheeks turned gray. He lowered the receipt. Pavel lowered his head. Even the old woman at register 1 stopped arguing about cabbage prices and gripped her shopping basket against her coat. Lev Volkov walked past aisles of canned peas and stale holiday candy, as if he had every right in the world to be there, and maybe he did. 2 men entered behind him, broad-shouldered, alert, and wearing dark coats that bulged in the wrong places. Bodyguards, soldiers, executioners. I did not know which, and I was too busy trying not to shake to care. Lev stopped at my register. He looked at the receipt in the drunk customer's hand, then at me, then at the customer again. His face remained calm, but it was the kind of calm that made my ribs tighten. "What happened?" he asked, and his voice was low, almost lazy, with that hard Russian edge that turned softness into threat. The drunk man swallowed. "Nothing, sir, just a mistake." He asked if I was deaf, I said, before I could stop myself. Pavel shot me a warning glance, but I was already beyond caution. Poverty burns your fear down in strange places. When people laugh at you long enough, sometimes all that remains is the part that refuses to bow prettily while they do it. Lev turned his eyes on me, and I felt the entire store watching to see if I had just signed my own death certificate over 12 rubles and wounded pride. Instead of speaking, he held out his hand for the receipt. The customer gave it to him with fingers that trembled. Lev scanned it once, then placed it on the counter between us. "She charged you correctly," he said. The man's mouth opened, closed. "And you insulted her because you thought she could not answer back." His gaze did not rise, but somehow the room got colder. "Apologize." At first I thought the customer would refuse out of sheer male stupidity. Then he looked up and made the mistake of really seeing the man in front of him. Whatever he saw there drained the last of his pride. He turned toward me with wet fear in his eyes and muttered, "And I apologize. It should have felt triumphant. Instead, it felt humiliating in a new and sharper way because everyone only respected me when a monster stood beside me. I lifted my chin anyway. Next time, count your own money before accusing a cashier of stealing it." Something flickered in Lev's expression then. It was not amusement exactly, more like surprise at finding steel where people had promised him weakness. He looked at my hands next, maybe noticing the cracked skin, the raw knuckles, the way I kept them flat on the counter to stop them from shaking. Then his gaze shifted to the sunflower pins sewn into my vest pocket, cheap felt petals stitched by hand and fraying at one corner. "My sister made that?" he asked. The question startled me. "My brother," I said. "He was 11 when he stitched it, and he said the uniform looked sad." Pavel cut in too fast. "Sir, if there's anything you need—" Lev raised one finger, and Pavel fell silent like a switch had been turned off. "I need cigarettes," Lev said without taking his eyes off me. "And the truth. Which of those is more expensive in this store?" No one answered. I knew better than to speak, but the bruise on my dignity was fresh and throbbing, and maybe I wanted someone, even a devil, to hear me for once. "Truth," I said quietly. "Cigarettes are on discount." One of his men looked down to hide what might have been a smile. Lev did not smile, yet the air around him changed, just a fraction, as if something inside him had leaned closer. That was the first moment. The second came less than 5 minutes later, and it was the one that made him remember me. The little girl in a pink hat wandered in through the automatic doors, crying so hard she could barely breathe. She couldn't have been older than 6. Her coat was unzipped, one mitten missing, cheeks red from snow and panic. Everyone stared, but nobody moved. That was the city I lived in. People could witness a child freezing and still compare sausage prices while deciding whether compassion was affordable that day. I left my register before Pavel could bark at me and knelt in front of her. "Hey, hey," I whispered, taking off my own scarf and wrapping it around her tiny throat. "Who are you here with?" She hiccuped that she had lost her mama in the snow outside. I asked her name. "Katya." I asked what her mother looked like. "Red coat, brown hair, crying," the girl added, as if that last part mattered most. Down when I stood up holding the child's hand, I nearly walked straight into Lev. He was closer than I realized, watching with that unreadable face. "The camera's outside," he said to one of his men. "Find the mother." Then to me, "Take her to the office. It's warmer." Pavel immediately protested. "Staff only, sir, and the tills." Lev turned his head, just enough. "If she leaves the child here, I'll assume you prefer dead customers to inconvenient ones." Pavel's lips snapped shut. I took Katya to the office. wrapped her in the ugly gray blanket we kept for inventory nights, and gave her a tangerine from my own bagged dinner, because children cry more softly with sweetness in their mouths. 10 minutes later, the mother was found outside near the loading bay, half hysterical, and when she ran in and clutched her daughter to her chest, and she kept thanking me with tears and thanking Lev with terror. He accepted neither. He merely nodded once, then told one of his men to have them driven home. Most powerful men perform kindness like theater. They make sure you know the cost of it. Lev Volkov looked offended by gratitude, as if mercy embarrassed him. That should have warned me. Instead, it made my chest ache. After the mother and child left, I returned to my register. My dinner tangerine was gone. In its place sat a box of imported mandarins tied with dark green ribbon, the kind no one in my neighborhood bought because the rent always came before beauty. I looked up. Lev was at the cigarette counter speaking with Pavel in a voice too low to hear. Then he turned and started toward the exit, bodyguards falling into step behind him. He did not look back. But when he reached the doors, he said, still facing the snow, "You should eat during your shift, Alina." Pavel froze. I froze harder. I had never told Lev my name. He went out into the storm and the whole store exhaled only after his SUV disappeared. For 3 days after that, I told myself it had meant nothing. Men like Lev Volkov did not walk into poor girls' lives and change them. They brushed past them like winter wind, noticed them only in passing, and left behind stories other people twisted into omens. I worked my shifts. I smiled for old women. I counted change twice. I took extra bread rolls home when the bakery section marked them for waste at closing, and pretended not to see Pavel docking my pay for register shortages that never existed. At our apartment, and I helped my 17-year-old brother Misha study by the kitchen radiator because heating the whole place cost too much, and I hid the imported mandarins under his chemistry book so he would think magic still occasionally happened to people like us. He asked where they came from. I lied and said, "A customer forgot them." Misha had thin wrists, gentle eyes, and the kind of careful intelligence poverty tries to crush early, because clever children ask why the world is built to spare some and break others. Our parents were gone. Our mother had died of pneumonia 3 winters before, because the clinic kept delaying tests until there was no time left to save her. Our father had died long before that. If disappearing into vodka and debt could be called dying in stages, Misha was the only person on earth whose hunger hurt me more than my own. On every shift I worked, every insult I swallowed, every night I walked home with my keys between my fingers like claws, I did it because he still had a chance to become someone untouched by all this. Pavel knew that too. Cruel men always know where your softest place is. The week before New Year's Eve, he called me into the stockroom after closing and shut the door behind me, with his stomach pressing against his belt and his breath sour with sausage and cheap alcohol. "Money's missing again," he said, leaning against shelves of detergent as if he owned the building and everyone in it. "That's 3 times this month. I did not take anything." He shrugged. "Maybe not, but the owner won't care. Missing money under your till, your name on the reports. Your brother already in trouble at school for unpaid fees." He smiled when my face changed. "You see, I know many things. Life is expensive, Alina, but sometimes debts can be renegotiated." I went very still. "Open the door." His smile widened. "Don't be stupid. You think any man is going to choose your side over mine? You're poor, always tired, and 1 bad week from sleeping in the street. Girls like you survive by making practical decisions. I wish I could tell you I slapped him. I wish I could tell you fear makes women brave in clean, cinematic ways. Most of the time, it just makes you calculate exits and costs in a blur." I moved backward until my spine touched stacked boxes of powdered milk. "If you touch me," I said, "I will scream so loudly the whole street hears it." "Then scream!" he said, stepping closer. I am, and tomorrow I'll make sure your brother gets expelled for unpaid fees, and your landlord hears rumors about men visiting at night. He had done his homework. That was what made him dangerous. Not strength, not size, not even lust. Strategy. The stockroom door opened before he reached me. We both turned so fast I nearly slipped. Lev Volkov stood there with snow melting at the collar of his black coat and a grocery basket hanging from one gloved hand like he had truly come to shop. Two men waited behind him, expressionless. Pavel stumbled back, all color draining from his face. "Sir," he stammered, "we were just—" "Alina," Lev said, not taking his eyes off Pavel. "Step out." I did. I stepped around him on legs that barely held me, my pulse roaring in my ears, and for one stupid second I thought maybe I should explain. Maybe he would think I had invited this because poor girls are trained from childhood to prove their innocence before anyone even accuses them. But then I looked up at him and saw something far worse for Pavel than doubt. Recognition. Not of the sign, but of the kind of man creating it. Some monsters could smell each other immediately. The stockroom door closed. No one in the store moved. No one breathed. From the other side came no shouting, no crash, no dramatic threats, just silence. Then, after maybe 30 seconds, a short, ugly sound, like someone gasping through a broken mouth. A minute later, the door opened again. Pavel stumbled out, holding a bloodied hand against his nose, eyes streaming, knees weak. He looked at me once, and what I saw there fed me for weeks. Not desire, not contempt, fear. And Lev followed him out and set his basket on my register as calmly as if nothing had happened. Inside were bread, black tea, buckwheat, honey, oranges, and a jar of raspberry jam so expensive I almost laughed from the absurdity of it. The bodyguard nearest the door handed Pavel a folded piece of paper. Pavel took it with shaking fingers. "What is that?" I asked before I thought better of it. Lev looked at me then. "His resignation." Pavel opened his mouth. Lev tilted his head. Pavel signed. I stared at the paper, then at the groceries, then at Lev. "You can't just come in here and—" "Remove a parasite?" he asked. "Apparently I can." The problem with powerful men is that they begin to think force is the same as justice. The problem with me was that I was shaking too hard to be polite. "And what gave you the right?" Every employee in the store seemed to stop existing. Lev's men shifted subtly, as if unsure whether to intervene or admire my suicide. Lev regarded me for a long moment, his pale eyes unreadable. "He cornered you. That does not make me yours to avenge." Something changed in his face, so slight anyone else might have missed it. "No," he said quietly, "it does not." He took out a black card and placed it on the counter. No name on the front, just a number embossed in silver. "If anyone troubles you again, call." I looked at the card but did not touch it. I don't accept favors from dangerous men. And yet, dangerous men keep leaving them in front of you. His gaze slid to the groceries. "Consider them repayment. You gave your dinner to a frightened child. I dislike unpaid debts." Then he picked up his basket, nodded once to the stunned assistant manager, and walked out into the snow as if he had not just broken my life open with one measured act of violence. That night, Misha found the card in my apron pocket where I had hidden it from myself. "Who is Volkov?" he asked. I took it from him too quickly. "No one." He looked at the groceries on our table, at the raspberry jam we could never afford, and then back at me. "You look like someone who has seen a ghost." "Worse," I muttered. But that was not true. Ghosts belong to the dead. Lev Volkov felt more alive than anyone I had ever met, and that was what frightened me. A week passed. The store owner promoted Irina, the oldest cashier, to manager because apparently unexplained resignations accompanied by signed silence were persuasive. She was strict but fair, which in our district qualified as saintly. The shortages stopped. So did the nightly dread of being trapped in a stockroom with the wrong kind of man. I should have felt relief. Instead, I felt watched by absence, as if the city itself had leaned in and was waiting to see whether I would dial the number on the black card. I did not. Then Misha disappeared after school. When the call came, I was stacking discounted canned beans near aisle 4. His teacher sounded embarrassed, which was how institutions always sounded when they failed poor children. Misha had not attended his afternoon classes. No one knew where he was. His phone was off. By the time I got permission to leave, evening had fallen and the snow was thickening again, swallowing the sidewalks and every sound I needed. I searched the metro station and his favorite secondhand bookstore, the alley behind school where boys smoked cheap cigarettes and tried to look older than their hunger. Nothing. After 2 hours, I stood under a broken street lamp with my hands numb and the black card warm in my coat pocket because I had been touching it every 10 minutes without admitting it. I called. The line rang once. "Where are you?" a man's voice asked. Not hello, not who is this. As if he had expected me all along, I told him. There was a pause, short but sharp, and then Lev said, "Go home, lock the door. I'm sending someone." "I don't need someone," I snapped, half from fear and half from the humiliation of asking. I need my brother, and you'll have him faster if you do exactly what I say." No one had ever spoken to me with that kind of certainty and made it sound less like control than a structure I could lean against. I hated how much I needed it. I went home. A black sedan was already outside our building when I arrived. A woman in her 40s stepped out before I could reach the stairwell. She wore a charcoal coat, gloves, and the expression of someone who could clean a gun while discussing table settings. "Sophia," she said, "Mr. Volkov asked me to stay with you. I don't need a babysitter." "No," she agreed pleasantly. "You need tea while men search places women shouldn't be standing alone in after dark," I should have argued. Instead, I let her follow me upstairs because my hands were shaking and my lungs kept forgetting how to work. "I'm in the apartment." She put water on for tea without asking where anything was, which told me this was not the first crisis she had managed for a frightened woman in one of Lev's shadows. She noticed the patched curtains, the textbook stack, the sunflower pin hanging from a nail by the door when I took off my vest. "He was right about you," she said. My head snapped up. "What did he say?" "That you would apologize for needing help before you ever thanked anyone for giving it." She opened the tea tin, found the good cups instead of the cracked ones, and gave me a look almost maternal in its severity. "Sit down, Alina." I sat. It took 3 hours. 3 hours of tea going cold, snow thickening outside the window, and every old fear in my body crawling awake. At 11:20 there was a knock, and I was already at the door before Sophia stood. Lev entered carrying my brother in his arms. Misha was conscious, wrapped in a dark wool coat, too expensive to belong to him, one side of his face bruised, lower lip split. I made a sound I had never heard from myself before and rushed forward. Lev set him down carefully, one hand steadying his shoulder until I got him onto the sofa. "What happened?" I asked, touching Misha's face with frantic fingers. "Who did this?" Misha winced. "I'm okay." He was not okay. There was dried blood on his collar and rage rising so hard in me I could taste metal. Lev crouched in front of the coffee table and placed a pharmacy bag on it. Ice pack, antiseptic, pain medication, clean bandages. He had thought of everything. 3 boys from school, he said. One was the son of the man from your register. He decided public embarrassment required correction. My vision tunneled. Because of me. Because of weak men, Lev corrected. Not because of you. Misha looked from him to me with dazed confusion. You know the Mafia? I almost laughed hysterically. Apparently the Mafia knows me. Lev ignored that. He turned to Misha, and to my shock his voice changed. Not softer exactly, but more deliberate, as if he understood bruised children moved around pain in careful circles. Did they touch your ribs? A little? Dizzy? Earlier. Lev nodded and handed the ice pack to me. A doctor is downstairs. I looked up sharply. You brought a doctor? You called because your brother was missing, he said. I brought what was needed. There are moments in a poor person's life when kindness feels more violent than cruelty. Then because cruelty confirms what you already know and kindness reveals how starved you have been. My throat tightened so suddenly I had to look away. I pressed the ice pack to Misha's cheek. Thank you, I whispered, hating that the words sounded thin beside what he had done. Lev stood. The boys won't trouble him again. The certainty in his tone made Misha go still. What did you do? I asked. His expression closed. I spoke to their fathers. That answer should not have satisfied me, but something in his face said the true version would only keep me awake forever. The doctor came up, examined Misha, declared nothing broken, and left with one of the guards. Sophia cleaned the kitchen in small, efficient movements until the apartment felt less like a place where terror had sat down. Through all of it, Lev remained near the window, the one large hand resting at his side, gaze occasionally flicking toward Misha as if verifying he was still breathing. When the doctor was gone, and Misha had fallen asleep on the sofa with his chemistry book against his chest, because fear had exhausted him back into habit, I found Lev in the hallway outside our apartment. Snow shone pale through the stairwell window behind him. Why? I asked. He looked at the cigarette burn on the wall instead of me. Why what? Why do this? Why me? At first I thought he would give me one of his cold half-answers and disappear again into the city. Instead, he said, because no one came in time for my sister. The words hit with strange, quiet force. He still did not look at me. She was 15, he continued. There was a man who thought fear made him untouchable. People knew. People whispered, and no one intervened until it was too late. His jaw tightened once. I was 19 and already dangerous, but not powerful enough yet. By the time I found her, she no longer trusted rescue. The stairwell seemed to narrow around us. I had never imagined grief inside him because men like Lev were easier to fear as stone than flesh. I'm sorry, I said, and meant it with my whole chest. He finally looked at me then, and for the first time I saw exhaustion living behind all that control. It was not visible until you knew where to search. Don't be sorry for me, Alina. Be difficult. Stay alive. Make men like Pavel regret underestimating women who survive winters without them. Something in me cracked and steadied at once. I'm always difficult. Yes, he said, and this time there was the faintest shadow of warmth in his voice. I noticed. After that, the city started rearranging itself around us. Not suddenly, not magically. Slow enough that I kept pretending coincidence still existed. A man from the school administration called 2 days later to regret the misunderstanding over Misha's unpaid fees and inform us that an anonymous donor had covered not only the arrears, but the next year's science program costs. I refused to ask questions because I knew the answer and hated how my chest softened around it. The landlord, who had spent months threatening us over late rent, became almost respectful after receiving a visitor he never described. A neighbor who used to let his drunk friends loiter near our stairwell stopped allowing them there. At the store, 2 men in dark coats began appearing outside around closing time on nights I worked late. They never came in. They just leaned against a car and smoked until I locked up, then followed at a distance when I walked home. I confronted Lev about it the next time I saw him, which happened because he began shopping at my store every Thursday. Not shopping exactly, surveying. He would appear a little after 9 when the after-work crowd thinned and the fluorescent lights turned everyone ghostly. He bought simple things, tea, black bread, apples, good butter. Sometimes children's sweets he claimed were for a driver's daughter, though he never looked like a man who lied to impress cashiers. The whole staff stiffened when he entered, Yet he never asked for anything special, never flirted, never made a spectacle of power. He merely placed his items on my counter as if Register 3 had become a fixed coordinate in his week. You sent bodyguards to follow me home," I said one Thursday while scanning his tea. "They are not bodyguards, they are observers." "That sounds worse." "It is more accurate." I put the tea in a bag harder than necessary. "I don't like being watched." "No," he said. "You like being safe. You object to the method." I leaned in, lowering my voice because old woman Irina was pretending not to eavesdrop 3 meters away. "You don't get to decide what safety looks like for me." His eyes rested on my face, then on the sunflower pin sewn to my vest pocket. "If I wanted to decide everything for you, Alina, you would know." The words should have felt threatening. Instead, they slid under my skin like heat from a stove you know is too close. I hated that, too. "That is not reassuring." "Good," he said. Reassurance makes people careless." Then he paid, took his bag, and added, almost as an afterthought, "The men will remain." I waited until he was almost at the door. "You're impossible." Without turning, he replied, "And yet here I am every Thursday." It was not a flirtation. It was worse. It was a pattern. Patterns become trust before you notice. January wrapped the city in brutal white. The river froze at the edges. People walked with their shoulders hunched and eyes lowered, as if the sky itself could be insulted by direct attention. One Thursday, Lev came in with a cut across his knuckles and a bruise hidden badly along his jaw. I scanned his groceries without comment because poor people learn not to ask dangerous men why they bleed. But when he handed me cash, I saw another cut across the base of his thumb, and deep enough to split each time he flexed. "You need stitches," I said. "No." That was not a suggestion. His gaze lifted to mine. "You are speaking to me as if I belong at your register." "You're dripping blood on my counter," I said. "That makes you my problem for at least 30 seconds. I expected him to leave. Instead, he stood there while I reached under the register for the tiny first aid kit Irina kept for paper cuts and burns. It was ridiculously inadequate for a man like him. I opened an antiseptic wipe and held out my hand. After a beat, he gave me his injured one. His skin was cold, his fingers were scarred, strong, and shockingly still while I cleaned the cut. The whole store had gone quiet in that nosy, electrified way people go quiet when they think they are witnessing something intimate and maybe impossible. You should let yourself be helped before you start rotting," I muttered. His mouth moved almost into a smile, though it stopped halfway as if forgotten there. "Is that medical advice?" "It's cashier advice. We deal in practical emergencies." When I wrapped the bandage around his hand, I realized I was standing too close, his cologne dark and clean in the stale store air, his eyes on me with a concentration that made my pulse skip. "There," I said, stepping back. "Try not to punch anyone for 12 hours. No promises." He turned to go, then stopped and looked back. "How is Misha's science competition?" I stared. "How do you know about that?" "You told your brother to stop melting the kitchen spoon with acid while I was standing in your hallway." Heat rose to my face. You remember weird things?" "I remember useful things." He paused. "Did he win?" "He came second." "That means next time he'll be angry enough to come first." His tone was so matter-of-fact I laughed before I could stop myself. The sound startled both of us. He looked at me like laughter was a language he had once known and just heard again from another room. That was the beginning of everything dangerous. By February, Misha asked about him openly. "Is he bad?" my brother said one night while washing dishes in water that went cold too fast. I dried a cracked plate and thought of Lev's face in the stairwell when he spoke about his sister. I thought of the imported mandarins, the school fees, the cut hand he let me bandage. And the two silent men who always appeared outside on late shifts without ever stepping close enough to embarrass me. I thought of how my body no longer tensed first at his presence, but at his absence. Yes, I said honestly, I think he's done terrible things. Misha considered that, but not to us. No, he stacked a bowl carefully. Maybe because you look at him like he's a person. I stared at my brother. I do not. You do. Everyone else looks at him like he's a bomb. You look at him like he's tired. Children should not be that perceptive. Poor children often are. The real danger announced itself on a Tuesday. I was leaving work early because Irina's niece had covered the last hour so I could attend Misha's school presentation. The sky was already dark, to snow falling in thick, lazy sheets that made the streetlights look blurred and holy. I had just turned the corner past the pharmacy when a black van pulled up beside me. The side door slid open. A gloved hand clamped over my mouth. I bit hard enough to taste blood and kicked backward with every ounce of panic in me. Someone cursed. I was dragged halfway inside anyway, knees scraping metal, and saw three things in one flashing second: a needle in one man's hand, another man's face half hidden by a scarf, and on the seat beside him, laughing softly, the drunk customer from that first night at my register. "Oh, don't fight," he said. "You cost me face. Now you'll cost someone else something better." I went wild then. People talk about fight or flight like it is clean. It isn't. It is animal and ugly, and all the buried fury of every humiliation exploding at once. I drove my forehead into the nearest nose, screamed into the hand over my mouth, twisted, clawed, kicked the needle away, caught the side of the van with one boot, and shoved outward with everything I had. The man holding me lost his balance just long enough for my scarf to snag on the door handle instead of my throat. I fell backward into the snow, hard enough to see white sparks, and rolled as the second man lunged after me. He never reached me. A black sedan hit the van broadside with a shriek of metal that echoed off the buildings. The world shattered into headlights and snow and yelling. Doors opened. Men in black poured out. One of them seized my arm and dragged me behind the sedan just as a gunshot split the night. I curled instinctively, my breath gone. Then a familiar voice cut through the chaos, colder than the weather, colder than fear itself. "Alive?" Lev said. "The one with the scarf. Bring him alive." He was not wearing a coat, just the black suit, snow catching in his slicked back hair, neck tattoo visible above his collar like a dark brand. There was blood on one cuff that did not look fresh. His face had gone beyond anger into something quieter and more lethal. He crossed the street toward the van while his men handled the others with terrible efficiency. The drunk customer tried to crawl out the far side. Lev caught him by the ankle, dragged him back through the slush, and crouched beside him in the road. I could not hear what he said. I only saw the man's face change, terror blooming so violently I knew he had understood every word. And then Lev looked up and found me shaking against the sedan. Everything else blurred. He came to me at once, not running. Men like him probably never ran, but the speed of his focus hit harder than if he had. He dropped to one knee in the snow, gloved hands framing my face without gripping it, checking my pupils, my mouth, the cut on my forehead. "Where are you hurt?" "I'm fine," I lied, because women say that while bleeding all the time. His eyes darkened. "Where?" "My shoulder, maybe." Suddenly the shaking got worse, all the fear I had outrun crashing back in. "Misha," I said, "if they know where I live." "He's already been moved?" I stared at him. "Moved where?" "My house." The word should have alarmed me. Instead, relief nearly knocked me unconscious. He must have seen it. And because his expression shifted in a way I still cannot fully describe. Something like pain at how easy it had been to predict what mattered most. He took off one glove and pressed his bare hand against the side of my neck, grounding my pulse. "Breathe, Alina." It was such a gentle command from such a dangerous man that my eyes filled before I could stop them. I hated crying in front of anyone, hated what it invited, what it revealed, how quickly pity could turn to appetite. But Lev only held my gaze while the snow gathered on his lashes and said, so quietly I barely heard it, "Not one more thing will happen to you tonight. I swear it." I believed him. That was my mistake. Or maybe it was the first honest thing I had done in months. His house was not a house. It was the kind of old mansion people called an estate because wealth needed its own vocabulary. High gates, stone lions, windows glowing gold through the storm. Inside, everything was dark wood, antique mirrors, carpets thick enough to silence footsteps, and a heat so steady it felt unreal after years of radiators that moaned and failed. I wanted to hate it on principle. Instead, I stood in the entryway covered in snow and dried blood and saw Misha alive on a sofa near the fireplace, wrapped in a blanket and arguing with the silver-haired doctor about whether he really needed hot tea. I almost collapsed with gratitude. Misha got there first, crossing the room and hugging me so hard my bruised shoulder screamed. "I'm okay," he said into my hair. A scary woman named Sophia put me in a car and gave me chocolate and said not to ask questions. "Wise woman," said Sophia from the doorway, where she was somehow already holding a fresh towel, a medical kit, and my shredded scarf. I laughed weakly and cried at the same time, which made Misha pull back with alarm until the doctor assured him people occasionally did both without dying. Lev remained near the fireplace, one hand resting on the carved mantel, watching us with that same unreadable stillness he wore like armor. But I knew him better now. I saw the tension in his jaw, the tiny bloodless line of strain at his mouth, the way his shoulders only loosened when Misha sat back down and took the tea. "Who were they?" I asked. No one answered at first. The doctor began cleaning the cut on my forehead. It stung enough to sharpen me. "Ah, Lev, the man from your register," he said at last. "His name is Sergei Markin. His father launders money for a group that wants access to one of my shipping routes. They decided using you would force a response on their terms. I went cold despite the fire. Because you defended me. Because they mistook interest for weakness." His eyes met mine. "That mistake will not survive the week. I should have run then, should have gathered Misha and fled as far from wealth, blood, and men with shipping routes as our thin savings could carry us. But the truth is uglier and simpler. The world outside his gates had already proved it could reach for me, and the world inside them, for all its menace, suddenly contained safety, tea, medical care, and my brother breathing easy by a fire he had only ever seen in rich people's movies. "Deg, you can't buy the right to keep us," I said anyway, because dignity was the only possession I had never pawned. A strange light moved through his face, not mocking, not angered. "I know. Then why does it feel like you're trying?" He looked at the flames for a long moment before answering. "Because I know exactly how the world treats people after men like that notice them. It does not stop because one attack failed." His gaze came back to mine, direct and mercilessly honest. "Stay here until I finish it." Misha, traitor that he was, whispered, "Alina." I closed my eyes. When I opened them, Lev was still standing there, with all the patience of a man who could command armies and yet had somehow chosen to wait for one frightened cashier's consent. 3 nights, I said. 5. 4. He inclined his head once. I had 4. That was how I ended up sleeping under a carved ceiling painted with faded stars, while armed men guarded the grounds, and a cook named Galina fed Misha enough dumplings to make him suspicious of heaven. The first night I barely slept. Every creak of the mansion made me sit up. Every gust against the windows sounded like the city trying to get in. At dawn I went downstairs in borrowed clothes, expecting to find empty luxury and staff pretending not to see me. Instead, I found Lev in the kitchen, of all places, standing at the long marble island with his sleeves rolled back and a kettle steaming beside him. The kitchen itself was enormous, all polished brass and dark cabinets, but he looked oddly human there, as if expensive rooms softened around domestic rituals. He glanced up when I entered. You're limping. So observant. He poured tea into 2 cups. Sarcasm before sunrise. Good, it means you're not dying. I should have been afraid of how naturally he had made space for me at that counter. Instead, I sat drawn by the heat and the fact that he had chosen plain black tea in thick ceramic cups, not the absurdly delicate things rich men usually displayed for effect. Do you always make your own tea? Only when I want it drinkable. A laugh slipped out of me before I could stop it, and he handed me a cup. His injured hand was healing. The bandage I'd wrapped around it days earlier was gone, but I could still see the line where it had been. Did you sleep? He asked. Not really. Neither did I. The confession hung between us, small and dangerous. I looked up. Because of the attack? His eyes remained on the steam curling above his cup. Because men become reckless when they fail. I was deciding who else might try. He spoke about violence, the way accountants spoke about numbers. Precise, unemotional, inevitable. And yet the tea he had placed in front of me had the exact amount of honey I used at work when he bought it Thursdays. He must have noticed. He noticed everything. Those 4 days became the strangest and safest of my adult life. Misha roamed the library with round-eyed reverence and found, to his eternal delight, that Lev owned first edition science texts and obscure engineering journals no school in our district could ever afford. Galina, who claimed not to like people but clearly liked feeding them, I began slipping extra pastries onto my plate in the mornings with muttered insults about how city girls were all bones and stubbornness. Sophia taught me how to hold a knife for confidence, not murder, though her tone suggested either would do. At night, when the halls went quiet and snow pressed white against the windows, I would sometimes find Lev in the library alone, a drink untouched beside him, staring at the fireplace as if old ghosts had expensive habits. On the second night I asked him about the mansion. He was sitting in an armchair, jacket off, tie loosened, looking younger and far more dangerous for the loss of formal armor. It belonged to my grandfather, he said. He liked beautiful cages. And you? I inherited them. The answer should have ended there, but perhaps the hour made us reckless. Your sister, I said softly. Did she ever live here? His face changed. Not much. Enough. For a year. I waited. He could have shut down, frozen me out, turned the room back to ice. Instead, he set his glass aside and looked into the fire. Her name was Zoya, he said. She liked yellow. Thought it made people honest because no one brave enough to wear sunlight could be entirely false. I glanced down at the sunflower yellow vest folded over the back of a nearby chair, the one Galina had washed and pressed, because I refused to abandon my own clothes even in a mansion. That's ridiculous. Yes, he said. She was often ridiculous, but his voice had gone somewhere tender, somewhere grief did not fully destroy. What happened to her wasn't your fault, I said. No, he agreed. Damn, but I built my life as if power could retroactively become protection. That is its own sickness. I should have said something wise then, something soft. Instead, I asked, did it work? He looked at me, candlelight and fire reflecting in those pale eyes. Not until I found something worth using it for. The silence after that felt like standing on thin ice and knowing both of us heard the crack. The next morning, I discovered Misha in the conservatory, playing chess with Lev. My brother had never once won against me, which made his expression of severe concentration almost comical. Lev, however, was treating the game with absurd seriousness, elbows braced on his knees, tattoo visible above an open collar, as if a 17-year-old science nerd represented a geopolitical threat. "You're baiting the rook," Misha accused. You're leaving the bishop unattended," Lev replied. I stood unnoticed in the doorway for a full minute, watching this feared man from whispered city stories sit in winter sunlight and let my bruised brother challenge him like equals. Something inside me shifted then in a way romance stories never prepare you for. It was not heat, not desire, not even hope. It was recognition of gentleness, chosen, not performed, of power kneeling rather than looming, of a man who had every reason to become monstrous in all directions and had somehow preserved precise corners of care like contraband. Misha saw me first. "He cheats," he said immediately. "I do not," Lev said. "You use silence as psychological warfare. That is not cheating. That is culture." I laughed so hard I had to hold the doorframe. Then Lev looked at me, and the expression in his face then was brief but devastating. He looked proud of causing that sound. I was in trouble. The attack investigation, if you could call it that, moved in currents I was never meant to see. Men came and went. Phones rang. Sophia drove out at odd hours. Once I passed the study and heard Lev saying in a voice like winter steel, "No, not the father. He'll fold if the son speaks first." Another time I found blood on the cuff of a guard in the hallway and learned not to ask questions after sunset. Still, Lev kept his promise in the one way that mattered most to me. He did not lie when I asked if the threat remained. "Some of it," he said, on the fourth evening as we stood on the terrace under heating lamps, snow glittering in the gardens beyond. The attempt was ordered by Markin's father, but financed by a man named Viktor Saranov. I had heard the name. Everyone had. Viktor Saranov controlled half the construction contracts in the city and all the rumors involving disappearances near the river docks. "Why?" "Because he was engaged to my sister before she died." Cold moved through me that had nothing to do with the weather. He hurt her. Lev's profile became stone against the snow. He broke her in small legal ways first: isolation, shame, threats no one could prove. By the time I understood what he was, she already believed ruin was the most merciful future available to her. I gripped the terrace rail until my fingers hurt. Suddenly, every gesture, every guard outside my store, every minute of control in him made brutal sense. And now he's using me. Yes, because of you. Because he recognized that my attention had settled somewhere human. I turned to him then. "You make it sound like a flaw." "It is." "No," I said, sharper than I intended. "It is the only reason you are not exactly what people say you are." For the first time since I had known him, Lev seemed at a loss. The wind moved through the bare trees. Somewhere inside the mansion, Misha laughed at something Galina shouted. Lev looked at me as if I had placed a weapon in his hand that he had no training to use. "You should hate me for bringing this danger closer," he said. "I should," I agreed. "But I'm starting to think danger was already here. You were just the first person strong enough to make it visible." His throat moved once. Then, very quietly, he asked, "Do you want to leave in the morning?" The question mattered because he meant it. If I said yes, he would let me go, even if it stripped him raw with worry. That was the difference between possession and protection, and it split my heart open to see it so clearly. "No," I whispered. His eyes closed for half a second, relief crossing his face so fast it almost didn't happen. "Then stay until I end this." So I stayed. Weeks passed. The outside world learned to fear the line between us. I returned to work eventually because poverty does not pause for trauma, and because I refused to become a hidden creature living on a mafia boss's mercy, no matter how soft the carpets were. But I no longer walked anywhere alone. The store owner, suddenly eager to please, raised my salary and installed new cameras. And men who used to linger too long at my register found reasons to shop elsewhere After one glance toward the suited figure occasionally waiting by the window with a paper cup of coffee and a face carved from threat, Lev never came inside while I worked unless Thursday gave him the excuse of groceries. He simply stood across the street sometimes, or sent a driver, or had Sophia appear with the most casual surveillance in human history. "You are impossible," I told him one night when he drove me home himself because the streets were icy. "And yet safe," he replied, eyes on the road. "You say that like it cancels everything." "It does not," he said. "It only outranks your annoyance." I should not have smiled. I did anyway. What I did not understand yet was that Viktor Saranov was done playing with distance. The first direct blow came through Misha. His science mentor called to say a university scholarship interview had been moved to a private location due to sponsorship interests. Something in the phrasing felt wrong, slick, and rehearsed. I mentioned it to Lev that evening at dinner in the mansion's smaller dining room, where the candles always made the walls look softer than they were. He put down his glass immediately. "Where?" I told him. His face emptied in that terrifying way I had learned meant real danger, not irritation. "No." Misha looked between us. "What?" "That address belongs to Saranov." The room went still. Even Galina, setting down soup, muttered a curse. "How would he know about Misha?" I asked. Lev's gaze met mine. "Because he's studying us." The shame of that hit before fear. Studying us, our routines, and our hopes, the cheap dreams we kept like hidden bread. "He's using my brother to get to me." "No," Lev said, and his voice had gone flat with murderous intent. "He's using your brother to get to me. There's a difference, and he is about to learn it." The interview never happened. By midnight, half the city's rumor mill was muttering that Viktor Saranov had lost 3 warehouses in one fire and 2 financial officers to a tax investigation so sudden it felt supernatural. Lev did not confirm involvement. He simply came back to the mansion at 3 in the morning, smelling of snow, smoke, and expensive soap, kissed the top of Misha's sleeping head as he passed the library sofa, and stopped when he saw me waiting in the doorway. "You're hurt," I said. There was blood at his collar. Not mine." I should have been horrified by how relieved I felt. "That is not comforting. It was not meant to be." He took off his gloves slowly, eyes on me. "Saranov has asked for a meeting." My stomach clenched. "With you? With you there?" "No." "Yes," he said before I could speak again. "Because I need him to see that fear did not take root where he wanted it. You are not bringing me to a meeting with the man who destroyed your sister." "No," he said softly. "I am asking whether you trust me enough to stand beside me when I end him. There are questions that reveal the shape of your heart before you answer them." I looked at him in the dim hall, at the bloodless control wrapped around barely contained violence, at the man who had brought my brother home, remembered how I liked my tea, and respected my no when a weaker man would have called it inconvenience, and wore his tenderness like a wound nobody was allowed to touch. "Yes," I said. His breath left him slowly. "Then wear something warm. Warehouses by the river are drafty." The meeting was a trap. Of course it was. But sometimes men like Lev attend traps the way kings attend funerals. Not to survive them, but to decide who deserves the grave. The warehouse stood near the frozen docks, iron skeleton black against a white river. Inside, the air smelled of wet concrete, rust, and old fuel. Lev's men fanned out soundlessly. I wore a dark wool coat over my blue dress and kept my hands folded so no one saw them shake. Beside me, Lev was a force field in human form, one gloved hand resting at the small of my back just long enough to guide, not claim. And the contact burned through every layer. Viktor Saranov emerged from the shadows smiling. He was older than Lev, perhaps in his 40s, elegant in the oily way some rich men are elegant, all polished shoes and dead eyes. Looking at him made my skin prickle with instinctive revulsion. "So this is the cashier," he said, studying me with the kind of interest butchers reserve for animals before weighing them. "I expected someone louder." "I expected someone more original," I replied. Lev's thumb brushed once against my back in what might have been warning or approval. Victor smiled wider. Zoya had spirit, too. It looked beautiful right before it became self-destruction. I felt Lev go still beside me, and suddenly I understood why silence could be more frightening than rage. "Say her name again," he said. "Gammon, I'll make your men watch while I remove your teeth." Victor raised both hands with mock innocence. "See, this is why I wanted the girl here. You were always easier to move when your heart was touched, Lev. Such a dangerous defect in a man like you." "No," I said before Lev could answer. "The defect is yours. You confuse cruelty with intelligence because people were too afraid to call you stupid when you first discovered fear worked faster than respect." One of Victor's men laughed involuntarily and then looked horrified at himself. Victor's eyes sharpened. "You think he can save you from what this world does to girls with no money and pretty faces?" I held his gaze. My terror was real, but so was every winter that had made me harder to break. "No," I said. I think he can make you regret underestimating one." What happened next moved too fast for clean memory. A gun appeared in Victor's hand. So did 3 others around the room. Lev shoved me behind a concrete pillar just as the first shot cracked. Men shouted. Glass exploded somewhere high above. One of Lev's guards went down, then another of Victor's. I crouched, ears ringing, heart punching my ribs, and saw Lev in flashes between gunfire, precise, ruthless, terrifyingly calm. He moved like violence had rules only he could hear. Victor retreated toward the loading dock, still firing. Lev advanced, and then Victor did the one thing he had waited for all along. He turned the gun toward me. I saw it happen in a clear, frozen instant, the barrel shifting, Victor's smile sick and triumphant, on the calculation that if he could not beat Lev's empire, he could at least tear the heart out of its new weakness. I had time to think absurdly of the sunflower pin on my work vest hanging back at the mansion. Yellow, sunlight, the color Zoya loved. The shot fired. Lev stepped in front of it. The sound that came out of me did not feel human. He staggered, one hand going to his side, but he did not fall. Victor looked stunned for half a breath, as if even now he had not fully believed Lev Volkov would put flesh where armor should be. That half-breath was enough. Lev raised his own gun and shot Victor once, cleanly, through the throat. The warehouse went silent, except for my own ragged breathing. Lev turned toward me and swayed. I reached him before the guards did. Blood soaked through his black suit at the right side. I'm bright and obscene against all that controlled darkness. "No, no, no," I was saying, pressing my hands there, panic blinding me. "Stay with me. Lev, stay with me." His face had gone pale, but his eyes found mine with impossible steadiness. "You're safe," he said. I think I started crying then. Truly crying. Not the stunned, leaking of a frightened woman, but the raw, ugly grief of someone who suddenly understands what she stands to lose. "Don't you dare die after saying something so infuriating." And then, with blood on his mouth and chaos all around us, he did the cruelest, most intimate thing imaginable. He smiled. Not fully, not prettily, just enough to tell me he was still there. He survived. The bullet missed anything vital by luck, speed, or the kind of divine intervention that sometimes visits men too stubborn to die before finishing their revenge. The surgeon at his private clinic said another centimeter, and I would have become a widow to a husband I did not technically possess, which was an outrageous sentence that made Sophia nearly choke on her coffee and me go bright red in a hallway full of armed men. For 2 days, Lev drifted in and out under medication, while the mansion moved around him in low, efficient currents. I barely left his bedside. Galena brought me soup I forgot to eat. Misha did homework on a chair in the corner because apparently once your sister's life becomes a crime empire, algebra still insists on existing. Sometimes I held Lev's hand. Sometimes I only watched his chest rise and fall and wondered when exactly fear had become love while my back was turned. He woke properly at dawn on the third day. Snowlight filled the room in silver bands. I was half asleep in the armchair beside his bed, my cheek pressed to the mattress because sometime in the night exhaustion had dragged me there. His fingers moved against my hair first, careful and hesitant in a way that undid me before I even opened my eyes. When I looked up, his gaze was already on me, clearer than I had seen it in days. "You disobeyed me," he murmured. I blinked. "Good morning to you too. I told you to stay behind the pillar. You got shot." "Yes," he said. "That was the part I was trying to prevent." Anger rushed back with such force it steadied me. "You arrogant, impossible, terrifying man. You stepped in front of a bullet and then had the nerve to act calm about it." His mouth softened at one corner. "You're crying again." I touched my face and found tears there. "Fine. Let him see. I thought you were going to die." His expression changed, all traces of dry humor fading. He lifted a hand, weak but deliberate. I took it instinctively, and he closed his fingers around mine. "I know." Silence stretched, fragile and full. The dawn made everything too honest. Finally, I whispered, "Why would you do that?" He looked at our joined hands as if the answer had been sitting there for some time. "Because the idea of a world that still contained me and not you became unacceptable." My breath left me. For a man like Lev, that was a confession, not polished, not easy, not dressed in romantic language, and bare and devastating enough to silence every defense I still owned. I leaned forward before fear could stop me and pressed my forehead to his. "You are the worst thing that ever happened to my heart," I whispered. "Good," he said softly. "I was aiming high." I laughed through tears and kissed him. It was not elegant. It was not carefully built for memory. It tasted like salt and exhaustion and all the words we had both hidden behind practicality for too long. He kissed me back like a man who had denied himself water in a desert and now distrusted abundance, one hand lifting shakily to the side of my face, not possessive, not greedy, just reverent in a way I had never imagined from him. When we broke apart, his eyes stayed closed for a second as if feeling alone had become harder to return to. After that, everything sharpened. Love did not soften Lev into a different man. It clarified him. The city learned that the line between patience and slaughter had moved, and my name was somewhere on it. Men who had laughed at me in that store began lowering their eyes when I passed. The drunk customer's father vanished from public life after signing over enough assets to fund 3 schools and a women's shelter in districts he had spent years bleeding dry. No one could prove Lev arranged it. No one was foolish enough to ask. Pavel, my old manager, sent a written apology so long and self-abasing that Galena framed the first page in the downstairs powder room for amusement. But the deepest justice was quieter. Lev bought the grocery store. He did it without telling me. One Thursday, I arrived for my shift and found contractors replacing the broken front signage, and 2 electricians installing better lights, and Irina standing in the office with tears in her eyes over a document stating every employee's wages had been raised and all security systems upgraded. There was also a clause creating an emergency assistance fund for staff facing domestic abuse, rent crises, or medical issues. I read it twice before looking up at Lev, who stood near the window with coffee as if buying entire businesses for emotional reasons was a normal weekday hobby. "You bought my store," I said. "I improved your store." "You bought it." He sipped his coffee. "Technically, a holding company acquired it." "Do not mafia language me." Irina fled the office. pretending great fascination with receipt paper. Lev waited until we were alone. No woman working there will ever again have to choose between hunger and humiliation, he said. That mattered to you, therefore it matters to me. I stared at him because that was not grand romance. It was better. It was love translated into infrastructure, policy, locks on doors, and wages that reduced desperation. I crossed the office and gripped his coat lapels. What am I supposed to do with you? Keep me, he said. So simply it stole my breath. So I did. Months passed. Winter loosened at last, the snow thinning into gray rivers along the curb before sunlight finally took hold. Misha won his next science competition, then a scholarship to a university in Moscow, and pretended not to notice when Lev arranged for an apartment there with a lease already paid. I can't let the mafia finance my education, he protested weakly. And you can, I said. Think of it as reparations from the criminal elite. Lev, who had become impossible about my brother in the quietest ways, only said, Study hard enough that one day you can insult my engineers properly. Misha grinned. Deal. At the mansion, which no longer felt like a cage so much as a place that had learned warmth by force, I found corners of life I had never expected. Breakfasts where Galina insulted everyone equally. Evenings in the library with my feet tucked under me while Lev worked through stacks of documents and silently slid my favorite pear candies across the desk without looking up. Sophia teaching me which guests lied by over-smiling, Lev standing behind me in the conservatory one morning, fastening a delicate gold chain around my throat with a sunflower charm hanging from it. I custom-made because he had noticed the old felt pin was fraying beyond repair and wanted the symbol preserved in a way winter could not ruin. I still have the original, I told him, fingers on the charm. I know, he said against my hair. Keep both. The old pin remained in my drawer. The gold sunflower rested over my pulse. Sometimes at night, when the world was quiet and the river wind rattled the windows, I asked him about Zoya. Not every detail. Just enough to keep her from becoming a sanctified absence. He told me she loved yellow dresses and terrible poetry, that she once tried to teach him how to dance and laughed until she cried when he stepped on her shoe, that after she died, he stopped allowing music in the mansion for nearly 5 years. One evening I turned on an old record in the library without asking. He looked up, startled, and then slowly came around the desk and held out his hand. You don't dance, I reminded him. I didn't, he said. So we learned. Badly. Quietly. In a room that had held too much mourning and suddenly had to make space for something else. The proposal, if that's what anyone wanted to call it, happened in the least polished way possible. A year after the night in the store, I was closing Register 3 under new bright lights, while snow fell outside again, soft and theatrical this time, as if winter had decided to imitate memory. The sunflower yellow vest had been replaced by better uniforms, but I still wore the old pin on special days because some beginnings deserve reverence. Lev came in as he had on so many Thursdays before, black coat dusted with snow, sharp cheekbones severe as ever, a neck tattoo dark against his skin, expensive suit making the cereal aisle look absurdly mortal. He set tea, bread, and a box of mandarins on the counter. You forgot the cigarettes, I said. I quit. I looked up in surprise. You did not. I did, he said. Apparently I'm easier to influence than I thought. That warmed me more than it should have. I scanned the mandarins and arched a brow. Feeling nostalgic? Possibly. He slid a small velvet box across the counter with the receipt. Also practical. I stared at it. Lev. He rested both hands on the counter, gaze steady on mine, while the whole store pretended not to exist. I don't have a speech prepared, he said. You would hate that anyway. But I know this. Before you, I thought protection was only useful as revenge for old failures. With you, it became something else. A home, perhaps, or faith. I'm not a simple man, Alina, and I will never be harmless. But I am yours in every way that matters to me, so if you can bear the inconvenience, marry me. My eyes filled immediately because of course they did. Inconvenience? He tilted his head. I am trying to sound reasonable. It is difficult from this side of the counter. I laughed, cried, and opened the box. Inside was a ring set with a pale yellow diamond surrounded by tiny white stones, like sunlight held in winter frost. You remembered, I whispered. You always wore light against ugliness, he said. It seemed appropriate. I closed the box and looked at him, this feared man who had once walked into my humiliation and quietly redrawn the map of my life. Yes, I said, but only if you promise one thing. His eyes narrowed with mock caution. That depends. You never buy my workplace again. Something very close to a real smile touched his mouth. Agreed. Then he came around the register, lifted my face in his hands, and kissed me in front of the store, the staff, the cameras, and every version of the girl I had been before him. I kissed him back without shame. People say women like me dream of being rescued by powerful men. They don't understand. Rescue was never the point. Being seen was. Being believed the first time I said no. Being protected without being diminished. Being loved by someone dangerous enough to ruin the world and disciplined enough to build me a safer one instead. We married in early spring. Misha walked me down an aisle lined with white candles and yellow flowers because I refused anything else. Sophia cried once, denied it twice, and threatened anyone who mentioned it. Galina fed 200 guests and still complained the entire menu was underseasoned. Lev wore black, of course, with that same impossible stillness and those piercing eyes that softened only when they found me. During the vows, he slipped the gold sunflower chain back around my neck because he wanted it there, under the veil, over my heart. In the years since, people still lower their voices when they say his name. Children still stop talking when black SUVs pass certain corners. Men who profit from fear still calculate carefully before crossing him. None of that changed. What changed was the space behind his hand when he reached for mine, the room he made at the center of his fortress for warmth, for music, for Misha's university visits with strange prototypes under his arm, and for Galina's Sunday lunches, for Sophia's impossible standards, for me. Sometimes I go back to Register 3 when the newer girls are nervous. I show them how to keep their voice steady with rude customers, how to note every discrepancy, how to never let a manager corner them alone. There is a discreet panic button now under the counter, an employee assistance office upstairs, and cameras in every hallway. On the wall by the break room is a framed policy in clean black print that says, "No debt, no need, and no fear will ever be used against a worker here." No one knows I wrote those words. Everyone knows who made sure they could be enforced. On winter nights, when the city glitters with frost and headlights and distant secrets, Lev sometimes brings me mandarins and sets them on the kitchen table without a word. He still remembers the first one I gave away. I peel them while he loosens his tie, the scent bright and sweet in the warm air, and for a little while the world shrinks to something manageable. Citrus, lamplight, the dark outline of the man who once frightened a whole store into silence and now closes his eyes when I touch the scar at his side. The bullet scar never faded completely, neither did mine. Maybe that is why we fit. We did not cure each other into innocence. We built something stronger than innocence from the ruins we already carried. And sometimes, when snow presses softly against the windows and the house is half asleep, he will draw me into his arms and rest his chin on my hair and ask, in a voice too quiet for the rest of the world, "Did they laugh tonight?" He means the old ghosts, the men who mocked me, the hunger. and the shame, the version of me everyone thought they could buy cheap. No, I tell him every single time. Not anymore. Then his hand settles over the sunflower at my throat, warm and possessive and achingly gentle, and I remember the fluorescent lights, the spilled coins, the laughter, the black SUV stopping outside in the snow. I remember the exact moment power looked at poverty and chose not appetite, not pity, but reverence sharpened into protection. I remember the poor cashier girl everyone thought would bend. I remember the man who walked into that store like winter and stayed long enough to become home. And if you ask me what the Russian mafia boss was willing to do once his heart changed, the answer is simple. Anything.